Hey everybody, Pastor Nathan here. As you can see, I am back in Wisconsin, and this week we're going to start doing something different. We're going to move past the prayer series for now, at least. Perhaps if someone has some more questions or there's some things and ideas I have, then perhaps we'll do that every now and then. But for now, what I want to do is for a while get back to what this Thursday group was all about, which was Bible study. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue on through what we were covering, which was the Gospel of Matthew. And I'm just going to do a basic, hopefully short, I have a timer here, keeping me, hopefully, to keeping this a fairly short video. But I'm just going to go through little bits each week for a few weeks. And just kind of generally discuss what they're about, and maybe hopefully a couple things you can take away, that you can think about, and that you can act upon in your life using these verses. So I want you to not just listen to me. I don't want you to just watch this video and think that's it. I want you to as well, maybe take some of the stuff we talked about with the prayer series, and I want you to look at this text yourself. Think about it, ask God how it's applying to you, think about how you can apply it yourself, and then maybe answer some of these questions I am asking here at the end. So let's start real quick with just reading through. Today we're covering Matthew chapter 8, verses 1 through 17. It's a story of 3 different healings, so I'm just going to read them all through real quick. When Jesus had come down from the mountain, great crowds followed him, and there was a leper. When he came to him and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, if you choose, you can make me clean." He stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, "I do choose. Be made clean." Immediately his leprosy was cleansed. Then Jesus said to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them." When he entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, appealing to him and saying, "Lord, my servant is lying at home paralyzed, in terrible distress." And he said to him, "I will come and cure him." The centurion answered, "Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only speak the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes. And to my slave, 'Do this,' and the slave does it." When Jesus heard him, he was amazed, and said to those who followed him, "Truly I tell you, in no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you, many will come from the east and the west and will eat with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the heirs of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." And to the centurion Jesus said, "Go, let it be done for you according to your faith." And the servant was healed in that hour. When Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and began to serve him. That evening they brought him many who were possessed with demons, and he cast out the spirits with a word, and cured all who were sick. This was to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took our infirmities and bore our diseases. So hopefully you read along with that. If not, just pause this video and take a second and go and read for yourself Matthew 8, 1 through 17. Now, there are kind of a few themes that are showing up in these 3 healing stories, as well as a couple things about the character of Jesus that are really important. And the first thing I want to point out is the importance of recognizing authority. That the reason why these people received healing was not merely just because of faith, and was not merely just because Jesus wanted to heal them, but it's a combination of things. And mostly, especially in the first 2 stories, we see this recognition of Christ's authority in our life. I believe it says Lord. Lord is a word of hierarchy. It means master. And at that time, hierarchies were a really big deal. Less so today, but you still see that, at your job, there's, the CEO, and then there's a hierarchy on down, and you fit somewhere in the hierarchy. And all of these people recognized the authority of Jesus, and they placed themselves under that authority. The leper being a very lowly person, a lot of lepers were forced to live outside of the communities. They were not a part of the rest of civilization. They had to live out on their own. So a very lowly person, he has no problem recognizing Jesus, this great, teacher and healer, and this is right after the Sermon on the Mount, mind you. He has no problem recognizing his authority. But then we have a centurion, a Gentile, a Roman, likely a pagan as well. Romans saw themselves as over Jews, as to be Roman was higher up on the social ladder than a Jewish person. So a centurion, recognizing the authority of Jesus and choosing to place himself under it by appealing to him and asking in it, and to heal his servant. This is no small deal. Outside of his faith, it's a big deal that the centurion placed himself under that authority. And we see the same with Peter's mother-in-law in saying that she served him, as in helped him and accommodated him and recognized him as someone to be served. We'll get back to that in a second. So the first thing that we need to understand about healing, or anything we want to get out of God, is recognizing the authority of Jesus in our life. He is in charge of all things. We'll see here and next week that he commands the storm. He commands nature. He doesn't just teach and give good moral and good ways to live by, but he actually has real supernatural, metaphysical authority in our lives, to where, as the leper says, you can heal me. That's another thing. He recognizes the authority. He doesn't just place himself under. He says, you, Christ, you, Jesus, you can heal me if you choose. You can make me clean. So recognizing authority, and Jesus, seeing his faith and seeing that recognition, says, I do choose. I will make you clean. The next thing to point out is, once again, faith. After we recognize Jesus' authority, we then are called to step into faith. We recognize that Jesus is over us and we must place ourselves under him. And now we have to put our faith in his work now that we have let him command us. So the centurion goes to Jesus and says, heal my servant. And Jesus says, I'll go with you. And the centurion stops him and says, no, I understand authority, for I am in a place of authority. I say to my servants, go, and they go. I tell my soldiers, do this, and they do it. So all you need to do is say it, and it will happen. This is faith. He's taking what he recognizes about the authority of Christ, and he trusts his word. He trusts the ability of that authority. Excuse me. Now this is, once again, faith is to act upon that which there is no proof of. You recognize Jesus' authority, but you go home alone just knowing, just him saying that your servant will be healed, that you will be healed. But you have no solid proof. You have no evidence that that's actually going to happen. It's an act of faith. He is acting upon that which he does not know. And so this is the second part of that healing process. If we want something out of God, we have to recognize the authority, and we have to have faith in that authority itself, that God is at work even when we don't see it, that we trust that Jesus is doing things even if we don't see him in the process of doing it, and even if we don't see him doing it for quite some time. And that's where Jesus is surprised at his level of faith. He's surprised, saying that he hasn't seen anyone in Israel, the children of God. He hasn't seen anyone with such faith than this centurion Gentile, probably pagan. And he says this kind of very dark thing, that I tell you, many will come from the east and west and will eat with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. In other words, resurrection day, we will be forever living in the house of God in new earth or heaven. But he says, so many will come from the east and the west and will do that, while the heirs of the kingdom will be thrown into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. In other words, it's no longer good enough to just be a part of the right group. It's no longer good enough to just be in the right church, to just be in the right community, to just have the right identity. You have to have the actual faith that even people you think wouldn't normally be a part of it. Pagans and Gentiles were not Jewish. They were not considered heirs of God's kingdom. And mind you, they were expecting a very physical, real kingdom, not what we recognize today as a spiritual thing. But he says that this faith, and specifically the faith in his authority and that he's acting on that authority, is what welcomes us in to God's kingdom. And so we become people who are defined by faith, who are defined by recognizing the authority, which is the kingship and the priestlyhood and the prophet of Jesus, and ultimately Messiahhood of Christ and his saving power. We recognize that authority and we have faith in him working, and that is what ushers us into the kingdom. But when we step outside of his authority, when we step outside of having faith in his authority, when we decide we're not going to put ourselves under Jesus, we're going to put ourselves in charge of our own lives, or we're not going to have faith. We recognize we need to put Jesus under us, but we don't trust God. We don't give ourselves fully over to him spiritually, physically, emotionally, mentally, intellectually, etc. We still aren't trusting him fully. Then we're going to find ourselves in the place of darkness. Not just, in the afterlife, but now. If we're not trusting the light of God, we're not going to see the light of God. If we're not having faith in his work, we're not going to see his work happen. If we're putting faith only in our own work, we're only going to see the product of ourselves, which is a product of death and destruction and sin, because that's what we are capable of. And so finally, the third thing is that we need to notice after recognizing Jesus' authority and having faith is that Jesus calls us into faithful, ethical action. For instance, when he said after to the leper, go to the priest and give your gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them. This was an actual law. If you were healed of leprosy, I don't remember the exact thing right now, but the priest would say, yes, you were healed of this skin disorder. Now you must make a sacrifice to God because of that. And so what Jesus is doing here is he's doing two things. One, he's first showing that even though in the Sermon on the Mount he kind of just rewrote the law, he's bringing the law into fulfillment. He's not abandoning the law. He's still saying you have to do the sacrifice of Moses, even though we're about to begin to do things different. Jesus still recognizes the importance of the law, and therefore we must still recognize the law as a good and holy thing, even if we're not bound by it anymore. Even if we're bound now by the Sermon on the Mount and by, the two greatest commandments, loving God with all our mind, heart, and spirit, and loving our neighbor as ourselves. If we're healed of something, if God does a big work in our life, and we love God, we're going to sacrifice to him, right? The law guaranteed and made sure we did that by legal command. Now we do it by choice and by faith. So if God's done something for you, a sacrifice is in order. It may not be a sacrifice of a dove or a ram. It may be a different kind of sacrifice. For instance, I believe I've said this before, being a pastor was not necessarily my initial career choice in life. But in my own personal struggle, in my own personal testimony of healing, I felt that my life had to become a sacrifice. That God helped me so much and healed me of so much that I could not just keep living as I were. I had to change. And I had to become a living sacrifice, as Paul said. And so I asked God how I could become that, and he led me into the path of the clergy. So that's just one example. Not all of us are going to get that. But if God's done something in your life, sacrifice is in order. So that's the first thing. And the law, like I said, guaranteed that. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is we're called into action. We're called into change. Christ changed us, and so we should not expect with that change that we just go about as we were. We're now changed people, and we need to act like it. So if you notice, he gives commands for each of these three things. Go to the temple and give this offering. With the centurion, go and let it be done according to your faith. He had to do that long trek with faith that it would happen, but once again, there was no guarantee. And with Peter's mother-in-law, Jesus didn't command her directly, but she chose to serve him as an action. The product of God interacting with us in our life is a call to action, a call to obedience, a call to reverence and worship and change. Once again, and I have this written down here somewhere, once we get what we want from God, do we let God change us, or do we continue as we always were? If we've been healed, are we just going to live as if we were before we were healed? If God helps us, are we going to keep living as if God never helped us? Are we just content with getting what we want out of God and not giving God what he's due, or getting more out of what God wants from us? God wants good things from us. Being healed is a good thing. Following the law is a good thing. Following his commandments of love is a good thing. And we shouldn't be content with just getting what we want out of God because he wants to give us good things. We should let that good thing transform us. And Christ is doing that by saying, now go and step into obedience, step into right action, step into faithful service and right living. And so these are the three things I want us to really hone in on: authority, faith, and response. So a couple questions I want to ask are we recognizing Jesus' authority in our life, in our world? And are we calling upon that authority? Are we saying, Lord, if you choose, you can make me clean? Are we saying, Lord, if you choose, you can help me? Lord, if you choose, you can lead my life, and I want to that life to be led? Are we saying that we are going to submit ourselves to be put under the divine hierarchy of Christ being the head of our lives? And so are we choosing and recognizing that authority? Jesus is Lord of all. He's the Lord of everything. So do we recognize that? And then the second next set of questions is, do we have faith in his authority to act without evidence, just like the centurion? Are you, after recognizing Jesus' authority, are you having faith in his authority to do work in your life? Once again, you can believe with your mind that Jesus is Lord of all, but your actions may be that you are Lord of your life. You are Lord of all. And so you can see you need to take that next step into faith in his authority. What do you need? What is God wanting for you? What is God calling you into? First, you must recognize that calling by recognizing his authority, and then you need to act on it through faith, knowing that God is doing something that is good for you, even if you don't know what that good thing is or what it's going to look like. Have faith that he is doing it. And then finally, I said this already, but once we get what we want from God, do we let God change us, or do we continue as we always have? This is a question of, are we stepping into obedience? Are we going to do as the leper did and as Peter's mother-in-law did? Are we going to listen and go see the priest? Are we going to serve God and sacrifice for him? Are we going to obey his commandments? Are we going to let him do more to us than we initially wanted? A lot of times, here's the thing about Christianity is, when interacting with God, we oftentimes get more than what we bargained for. And that's a good thing. It may not seem like a good thing at first because it requires a sacrifice and it requires work and it requires more of us than what we wanted. God's not a magic genie. He's not here to grant us wishes. He's here to lead us into a new way of life. And a new way of life means our everything. Not just a little bit, not just the stuff we want to hand over to God, but he wants our all. If you want to read an excellent book on this, I've said this several times and I'm going to keep saying it, but I recently read C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. I believe, if I remember correctly, he touches on giving our all to Jesus, and most definitely when we invite him to take a little, he wants even more. Okay, this has gone on way longer than I thought. So that's Matthew 8, 1 through 17. Take this, pray about it, think about it, contemplate on it, meditate on these words, and ask yourself these questions about authority, faith, and active response. So God bless. Go in peace. May the Lord enlighten and illuminate your life.